Hey guys, Argent here, with a reactionary review of Star Wars Episode 2 Attack of the Clones. Um, this is probably the worst Star Wars movie. Return of the Jedi is kind of a mess, and Phantom Menace is more boring. This one is just kind of, yeah, it's just doesn't even feel like a Star Wars movie. But let's jump right into it because these movies are really long and these reviews are long. I know these reviews run a bit long, but this is a 2.5 hour movie, pretty much, maybe a little shorter than that, and it takes time. So, Attack of the Clones takes place 10 years after the events of the first movie. Anakin has grown up under Obi-Wan's care into a good-looking young man who has deep anger issues, largely because ISIS and merchants destroyed his childhood by making him into a slave. Um, and we'll see Anakin do his own UN intervention against ISIS later on in this movie. Padme has also grown up into a beautiful woman, once again played by Natalie Portman. And yeah, so Obi-Wan has grown up too into a sarcastic, tired young man. Somehow between this and the next, and episode 4, he somehow ages a bunch of years, even though on average Jedi's live much longer than humans. But I guess it's just a continuity error. So Padme is no longer the Queen of Naboo. She has become instead the Senator for Naboo. As far as I can determine, each system gets a senator, and each system gets one vote in the Galactic Senate. And they are elected more or less the way that normal senators are elected, depending on what country you live in. So she's become one. Um, there is an increasing separatist movement growing. So before we really get into the plot, I'll have to talk about that and the situations involving that. So from what I've been able to determine, and keep in mind most of this is speculation and extended universe stuff, the movies don't really give us crap about the political events. After the events of the first movie, they attempted to have a trial against Newt Gunray and the Trade Federation. They were able to escape prosecution by paying people off. Kind of like how China manages to escape prosecution for any of its various faulty products. But yeah, so they managed to escape prosecution or any serious punishment. However, I believe the Republic continues to tax trade routes, and we begin to see a power struggle take place. Once again, this is not explored in the movie, this is just my speculation. My guess is that now that Palpatine's chancellor, he has begun to try and implement like economic regulations, maybe tried to crack down on the power a bit of private armies as much as he can. Maybe try to bring in some like safety regulations, some sort of like actual intergalactic trade bureau, maybe some like tariffs to fund the Republic to actually do a bit more. So all that stuff is probably going on, and the private sector is kind of angry about this. Because the Republic's been run by the non-aggression principle for the last 1,000 years or so. From what I was able to read in my research, the Trade Federation, the other corporate sectors, had literally invaded and taken over hundreds of systems, especially on the Outer Rim. So the Trade Federation alone controls, I think, 200 systems or something, and thus gets 200 votes. And the other banking clans and manufacturers have done something similar. They all have immense armies, and they don't like that Palpatine is violating the non-aggression principle by trying to rein them in and stop them, basically invading planets, taking them over, and turning them into slave worlds. Um, so yeah, so that all happened. From my understanding, also the NAP was, and to some degree, why there was so much slavery, chaos, and disorder on the Outer Rim, and why planets like Tatooine still permit slavery and rampant banditry to occur. So all that stuff is going on. So the various corporate groups decide to secede and form their own non-aggression principle libertarian paradise called the Confederacy of Independent Systems, which will have no taxes, no tariffs, no regulations. It will just be a place for strong economies, etc. So, because of all this, Palpatine is trying to do the rational thing, and he's like, well, we're going to have to develop an army for the Republic. Because, frankly, um, we there's nothing we can do to prevent these guys from seceding, and there's nothing we can do if they decide to invade the Republic and take a bunch more worlds and turn them into economic colonies, or just invade random worlds and steal their natural resources. There's nothing we can do about it. We need something at the bargaining table. Otherwise, these guys can just go run roughshod across us. So Padme Amidala, um, being well, I guess there's no real polite way to put this. Being a female politician, and a feminist female politician, she supports the NAP. She's like, no, my feelings. We need to have peace. We need to not have an army because my democracy, my liberalism. I think ultimately, kind of Padme's perspective is she comes from extreme privilege. She comes from a liberal, um, upper middle class, white family on one of the most peaceful, rich worlds in the galaxy. She has no idea what life is like for people like Anakin. She has no idea what life is like for people in cities like Coruscant with massive underclasses who live extremely rough lives, constantly harassed by crime, anti human sentiment, abusive trade monopolies, etc. So she just kind of thinks that the rest of the galaxy, like any good SWPL, is like Naboo, and that if we just try and explain it to them, then they'll just come around to her liberal views, and they'll support more democracy, and we don't need an army. I remember back in university, I was told by one of my professors if women ran the world, then there would be no war. Um, I guess I really doubt that because they wouldn't run the world. There would still be things like Islam, which would just run roughshod. The only two matriarchal societies that achieved anything were, I think there was two, one in Persia and one in India, and they got utterly destroyed by patriarchal Indo-Europeans who utterly wrecked them. The other ones that kind of had some elements that were like the Basques, and they were a stagnant society. Other matriarchal societies immediately were defeated upon contact with patriarchal ones, or otherwise collapsed. What does this all have to do with anything? Not a lot. I'm just trying to make a point here about Padme's character, that she's a SWPL basically. She's stuff white people like. She's an upper middle class female liberal, and has those opinions. So she's against the Military Creation Act, even though the Jedi are no longer capable of maintaining order. So she and Anakin re-meet. Anakin immediately falls in love with her at first sight. She had kind of been the first person to be nice to him, and he'd been dreaming about her for basically years. Anakin, actually, as I get older and I move further to right, I kind of like Anakin more and more. He's kind of an edge lord. I mean, like his whole thing is he wants to get married and have children, and like be the patriarch of the family, and like be a man, and that kind of thing. Um, so kind of it's interesting because he's kind of far right and Padme is kind of far left. And we'll see this kind of dynamic explored throughout the movie. So they re-meet, and he immediately kind of begins hitting on her and flirting with her, and she feels uncomfortable about it. Basically, what Anakin will have to do is just be more forceful and be more aggressive, and like any feminist, she probably will. She winds up liking that. Because if you ever noticed, feminists, in my experience at least, in the experience of people I know, they say, "Oh, I want like a new castrati," but they never go for those guys. They go for like the most masculine guys they can find, and then try to make them into feminists, male feminists. So upon her arrival at Coruscant, she narrowly manages to escape assassination. You see, the separatists attempt to assassinate her because she's against the leading voice against the creation of a military to fight the separatists. Yeah, I don't get it either. This whole movie doesn't make any fucking sense. Why would they assassinate her when they assassinate Palpatine? Like, Palpatine is the champion of having a stronger republic and having an army. Um, Whereas Padme Amidala would basically give them the kitchen sink and the car and the cow. She certainly gives Anakin the cow. But yeah, so they try to assassinate her despite her being their greatest ally. So then the assassin winds up being a changeling, and Obi-Wan and Anakin were being tasked to protect Padme. So through an absurd animated sequence, they chase down the assassin, but whatever the hell it is, it's kind of like a transgendering species that can like switch its shape. Gets killed by Jango Fett, who then flies away. So Anakin and Obi-Wan decide to split up. Obi-Wan will go try to investigate where the assassin came from, and Anakin will escort Padme back to Naboo, so she can go hide out till everything blows over. Now it's kind of interesting, just while we're on the topic, because later in the movie, when they have the Military Creation Act and emergency powers to the Chancellor, Jar Jar Binks remarks, "Why can't I wish Padme was here because she'd have the leadership to deal with this." But she was against the Military Creation Act, so she would have not supported it. It seems like they kind of forget that she was against the Military Creation Act part of the way through this movie and think that she's for it or something. Anyways, so the Jedi Council reacts with characteristic mild concern, and they send Obi-Wan by himself to track down the assassin. He goes to some guy who runs a diner, who somehow is an expert on exotic weapons, and they find out that the dart that he used to kill the other assassin, it's kind of confusing that Jango Fett subcontracted the job out to a third party, but showed his face anyways. We can assume that the idea was to lead them back to Camino. So he takes it to some guy who runs a diner. He's like, "Oh, this is a type of dart used at this random planet," and they can't find the planet in the archive. So it turns out that someone lost the planet, just kind of disappeared. Someone deleted it from the archives. It turns out it was someone named Sifo Dyas, who's never really explored or explained. So I'll just continue Obi-Wan before we get to Anakin. So Obi-Wan manages somehow to find his way to Camino. Once he reaches Camino, he finds that the cloners there have been creating an army for the Republic over the last decade or so. The clones are clones of Jango Fett, and they are artificially aged and trained since birth to basically have no fear of death and to just be a ruthless army for the Republic. No one really seems interested in investigating where this army came from, how it came about, why it exists. The Jedi don't seem particularly interested in it. I don't know. I think it's probably a plot hole. Maybe they were just happy that they wouldn't have to bring back the draft. I'm not really sure. Anyways, so Obi-Wan kind of reacts with mild concern to that. They just kind of take the army. Jango Fett and Obi-Wan have a stupid battle, and Jango Fett escapes. And Obi-Wan chases him to the planet of Geonosis, run by I forget what they're called. They're like the insect people. Anyways, back to Anakin and Padme. So they go to Naboo, and Padme goes to a retreat owned by her family. Apparently, I think it's her family. Apparently, her family is extremely wealthy, which makes sense given her perspective on the world. So they go back as refugees, to Naboo. 'Cause Naboo, like any good SWPL place, is taking in refugees. Probably like Boffins or something who are running some shady underground shit. Maybe they're taking in some like Troydarians and they'll run the Nabooian economy into the ground in a couple decades. I personally think that what's actually happening is the Galactic Reserve is funding the whole thing so they can lend money to both sides at high interest rates. Probably like Watto's third cousin or something. Anyways, so Padme and Anakin enjoy each other's company, and we get perhaps the most based scene in a Star Wars movie. Let me just find it. Where is it? Okay, so they're in a field and they're talking to one another and they reveal their political views. Let's see here. I don't know. Sure you do. You don't want to tell. Okay. Let's see here. Um, let's see here. You don't really like politicians, do you? Says Padme. I like two or three, but I'm not really sure about one of them. The one he likes is Chancellor Palpatine. I don't think the system works. How would you have it work? Says Padme in response to Anakin. Anakin replies, "We need a system where the politicians sit down and discuss the problem, agree what's in the best interest of all people, and then do it." Padme, that's exactly what we do, spoken like a true Slipple. The problem is that people don't always agree. Oh no, people don't agree. Anakin, well then they should be made to. Padme, by whom? Who's going to make them? Anakin, I don't know, someone. Padme, you? Anakin, of course not me. Padme, but someone. Anakin, someone wise. Padme, sounds an awful lot like a dictatorship to me. Anakin, well, if it works. So Anakin's basically based. He's not an idealist. He's not obsessed with muff freedom and mud democracy. And I think this kind of goes back to his childhood. Um, he's kind of he just wants order basically. I mean, his entire life basically was so fucked up because the Outer Rim has no order because the Republic is run by people like Padme who are against the Republic having an army, are against any kind of regulations, etc. And so guys like the Trade Federation and the Hutts can just engage in the slave trade, can sell drugs and shit, can invade entire planets and destroy them. For whatever reason, Padme defends the system that led the Trade Federation to invade her planet and relocate her people to camps. Why she defends it, I'm not sure. I think she's just a swipple. She's absolutely committed to liberal democracy, and it's a religion for her. It doesn't matter how many times it's proven wrong. It doesn't matter how many people die. It doesn't matter what the consequences are of her beliefs. She just believes in them. A Troydarian could steal her money. A Wookiee could a Gungan didn't do nothing and kill um, someone in an incident involving like a Nabooian neighborhood watch, and she wouldn't care because that's just how it is. I mean, I remember there's some Swipple in New Orleans who got mugged by the diversity, and they still said it. They blamed themselves for it, for whatever reason. So Anakin's just like, I don't really give a shit. We've tried this, and it led to the current crisis. If the Republic had done anything whatsoever to stop the Trade Federation, to stop slavery, if they had even a small army, like I'm not even talking at this point about like a huge army that the Empire will eventually get, but just an army big enough to like do something, to be actively try and stop the pirates and smugglers and shit. But they don't, and Anakin supports that because he understands like how the real world works. Because he grew up on a rough planet. He understands how greedy people are. He understands the evil shit that people will do to each other. He understands what happens when there's no order. Tatooine is a planet with no order. It's an anarchic society run by gangsters. Um, he gets what happens when there's not like a force to hold everyone in thrall. Padme doesn't understand that because she comes from a Swipple planet that's kind of like what Sweden used to be like, and they just have no idea how the rest of the galaxy works. They basically live in privilege. Their people are naturally peaceful, and that's to their credit. I'm not trying to accuse them of making bad decisions because their planet's obviously well run, but they have no idea what other species are like, what other people are like. Um, so that's kind of the issue. So Anakin has a sense that his mother is in danger while they start to fall in love. So they go back to Tatooine. It turns out he goes and finds out that his mother got married, but ISIS has kidnapped her. So Anakin goes and does what Obama won't do, what Space Obama won't do, and he goes and he slaughters ISIS. He does what Vlad the Impaler would do. He does what any sane person could do. He's like, ISIS is kidnapping and like raping women. ISIS is, well, white women specifically. Given that he's basically Jedi Jesus, it appears ISIS is kidnapping and raping white Christian women and then making them into slaves and torturing them. So Anakin's like, fuck it. Um, I gotta edge out. Um, this is total war. I'm gonna kill them and I'm gonna kill their children and their women and just wipe out their whole barbaric culture so they won't be able to threaten me or anyone else again. So Anakin in an alpha as fuck display goes and wipes out ISIS single-handedly, thus bringing an end to the Tatooine crisis and the civil war between ISIS and the corrupt Republic-backed government. Yeah, so he takes out ISIS. Back at Coruscant, Yoda senses a terrible darkness in the Force because Yoda's like some lame Buddhist who doesn't like violence. He's like, oh, no, we need peace. Peace, well, while billions, trillions of souls are enslaved and being exploited by organized crime because we don't really care enough to do anything about it. And that's kind of thing about the Jedi. They're utterly heartless and unconcerned with human suffering. They're completely unwilling to do anything to alleviate it. All they do is just moralize and talk down to people. On Geonosis, back to Obi-Wan, he overhears a meeting between Count Dooku and the leader of the various Federation, the various Confederate parts, and they talk about the creation of a new droid army. He learns that it was Newt Gunray who ordered the assassination of Amidala as revenge for the defeat of the Trade Federation, which is really, really irresponsible. So, um, so basically, the Confederacy is going to build a huge army of droids because of the NAP, which allows them to have as many weapons as they want. I'm actually not against gun control. I'm just, if you have people in your galaxy, your galactic wide government, if you have subsections that have armies of quadrillion droids or trillions of droids that can by themselves fight off not only the central government but any combination of the remaining governments, that's generally speaking a recipe for disaster. Imagine in America if Texas had a bigger army than the rest of America put together, and also all the carriers were personally loyal to Texas and all the aircraft were loyal to Texas. That would destabilize the country. That's just the way reality is. So they arrest Obi-Wan. So they're gonna invade the Republic and probably steal a bunch of land and build their capitalist, libertarian super state or non-state. Sorry, non-state, because states are evil. So Obi-Wan Kenobi gets captured and is going to be executed because he's a spy, and it's completely legitimate because he did land on the sovereign world of Geonosis, and he was spying on them, and he did sneak past security. So the Geonosians are completely within their rights under pretty much any military code to execute him for being a spy, and for sneaking in without a formal declaration of war. So Obi-Wan transmits a signal to Anakin and says, "Look, guys, I'm in big trouble." Then Anakin goes to Mace Windu and he's like, hey guys, Obi-Wan's in a bind. He kind of got caught doing something stupid. So the Republic's like, okay guys, here's what we're gonna do. Um, the Confederacy can't be allowed to secede because we're a democracy, and part of being a democracy is not letting people vote on things and respect the results of their votes. We can't let the Confederate systems vote on leaving the Republic and accept the results of their vote because that would be undemocratic. Instead, we're going to invade them and make them do what we want them to do. Because democracy is not people voting on things and then accepting the results. Democracy is invading systems and forcing them to do what you want to do and killing trillions of people in the process. I understand that this is in part response to the Confederacy's planned invasion, but they were talking about invading the Confederate systems and forcing them into compliance long before this was revealed. Representative Binks calls for Chancellor Palpatine to be given emergency powers with which he can call for the creation of a Republican army. So back on Geonosis, Anakin and Padme show up to try and rescue Obi-Wan, and they get captured too, and they try to execute them in this big arena by making them fight these animals. But just as they're about to lose, the Jedi show up and stupidly get into a fight with an overwhelming number of droids who kill half the remaining Jedi, which is just awesome. So then the Republic shows up and invades the planet, and they somehow manage to win. The mechanics of the war don't really make a lot of sense because there are literally trillions of battle droids, and there's only about three. I think they state that there's 300,000 clone soldiers max. Um, but somehow 300,000 clones are able to beat a trillion battle droids. Even if the battle droids were the worst things possible, you'd think just with that amount of firepower they'd be able to win. And the Confederacy also has sentience like Geonosians and tanks and other kind of stuff. Somehow though he's not able to do it. So the Republic invades. There's a big battle scene. Anakin and Obi-Wan go and fight Count Dooku, who's the... I don't think I mentioned him, but he's not really been in the movie before now. Who is Darth Sidious's, a.k.a. Palpatine's sidekick, who is leading the Confederacy while Palpatine is leading the Senate, because this whole thing is a big scam. It's a big scam to centralize power and lead to the creation of the Empire. Also to break the power of the Lulbertarians who are controlling the Outer Rim. Um, so Anakin and Obi-Wan fight Count Dooku. Why Count Dooku's a count, who he is, where he comes from, I don't know. All we know is that he used to be the master of Qui-Gon Jinn, who was the master of Obi-Wan Kenobi, who is the master of Anakin. Who's the master of Ahsoka, who's not in this movie and is really annoying, so who cares? So Anakin and Obi-Wan fight. Anakin gets his arm cut off and gets the crap kicked out of him. Obi-Wan also gets the crap kicked out of him. Yoda shows up and is completely ineffective, and Count Dooku gets away. Then Yoda says, "Begun the Clone War has." And as Plinkett pointed out, he started the Clone War. The Republic started the Clone War by invading the sovereign world of Geonosis without a formal declaration of war, without any sort of legislation really authorizing the Chancellor to do it, to invade them. So there was no declaration of war. They just kind of invaded a sovereign system on the pretense that it had arrested a Jedi who was a spy, a plainclothes spy, and was going to execute him, which is unproblematic under any real-world justice system. So we have a war started by the central government against the seceding systems. Now, what can we make of all of this? I had to heavily summarize because there's a lot of random crap in this movie, and I had to fill in a lot of blanks. At the end, we see Padme and Anakin get married. What religion is like in the Star Wars verse, we have no idea. So, yeah, what can be said about the overall plot? It'll kind of come to a head more when we talk about Revenge of the Sith. Overall, though, I would say I'm broadly sympathetic to Palpatine. I've always kind of been sympathetic to Palpatine, even when I first watched the movie. I think the war kind of people say he engineered it, but it kind of represents the inevitable, what was happening anyways. The Republic having no means of enforcement or ability to fight any of its member states was inevitably going to lead to a civil war. It just was. They are attempting to hold together a multicultural superstate where none of the members really like one another without the use of force. Multicultural states almost invariably break apart into their component parts. And this isn't just um, like Czechoslovakia. This is different species. These aren't all humans. These aren't even all people who breathe the same atmosphere. How can you expect to hold all these people together in one republic without the use of force? I guess the idea was to just be autonomous, etc. But within this structure, it's worse than if they were all independent, because many of the worlds like Naboo don't have an army because they're dependent upon a central government that has no army. So if there was no republic and all the systems were independent, they'd all have their own militaries and would be able to defend themselves. Under this system, none of the various peoples have their own military forces, and the few who do are able to run roughshod over the others. So nothing about the system really makes sense, and Palpatine kind of triggered a conflict that was more or less inevitable. I'll talk about this a bit more in Revenge of the Sith, or maybe when I get to the later films. But I kind of feel like to some extent Palpatine represents a reaction of humans to the decline in influence and to a dissatisfaction with the multiculturalism and the literally racial multi-specialism that is running the Republic, and a desire to create an authentic human culture, an authentic human state. So this is more or less where the Empire is more or less where liberalism had to end, because to maintain any of the things that were so against human nature and were in such denial of it, eventually someone was going to abuse it, because not everybody in the universe is a SWPL. Not everyone in the universe is an upper middle class white liberal who is okay with the non-aggression principle and wants liberal democracy. Lots of people don't. China doesn't want that. China wants a fascist government so China can make economy strong, or in this case, Nemoidians can make economy strong. Um, this is kind of the fate of all central governments, to be overthrown by stronger factions who can seek who have more to gain than to lose, been working within the system. So the Clone Wars more represents, to me, I think it represents the ironies and self contradictions of democracy, the willingness to use force and not allow self determination under a democratic system, and the inevitable results of having excessively decentralized societies, more or less excessively decentralized multicultural societies, because they invariably will break apart or there will be separatist groups. The Republic is more or less kind of a compromise. It's not really a council, a league or sorts that is not an alliance in any way, but is a place for people to meet, nor is it a real government. It's kind of a happy medium that's just strong enough to piss off people, but not strong enough to fight off even the most mildest challenges to its supremacy. So that's more or less my view of Attack of the Clones. I hope you enjoyed the review. I will do Revenge of the Sith soon. This is Argent Templar signing out.